This is the EF 50mm f1.8, and the 50mm f1.8 is a staple in most photographers' kit. Now, this particular one was released in 1987, which means that it's older than me. I was born in the 90s. In this video, we're going to go through the good, the bad, and maybe the not so ugly. And by the end of it, you might find that you want to buy a vintage lens yourself. Let me show you what I mean. This video is sponsored by VERO. So I currently have access to 3 different 50mm lenses. You've got the EF Mark I that was produced in 1987. You've got the EF Mark II that was produced in 1990, still a little bit older than me. And then you've got this one. This is the L-mount 50mm f1.8. This is designed to go with the L-mount alliance, so Panasonic, Olympus, Leica. This can go on those cameras that have got the L-mount. And this was produced in 2019, so it's a relatively modern lens, modern manufacturing and a different manufacturer to these two. So I can compare these 3 lenses and see how far we've really come in the last 30 years. And you might find that there is actually a few advantages to having an older lens. Now, you might think that one of the advantages of having a vintage 50mm lens is that it's cheaper to buy than the others, but that's not actually the case. You see, the older 50mm, the one from 1987, is actually roughly the same price second-hand as the newer 2019 L-mount 50mm lens. Now, that might not make a lot of sense. It's like over 30 years older than the newer one. Why is it the same price to buy? Well, first of all, it's really well sought after, that original one. The build quality of it is not necessarily higher than the newer one, but it has that solid, well-built feel. It's got a metal back to it. The casing feels solid. It feels like it could easily survive a couple of drops. That's the same for the newer one, but the difference is that stuff that's obviously proven itself to be long-lasting tends to go for a higher value. The other reason is that it's quite a rare lens now. Obviously, as time has gone on, there's less and less and less of them on the market. A lot of camera gear depreciates very quickly, so owning a lens that I know is actually going up in value, that's quite a nice feeling. So I'm going to do something very British and just spend 20 seconds whinging about the weather. Look at this, it's absolutely torrential. I was told there was going to be at least a bit of good sunshine this morning, but nope. Once again, we are being hit with torrential rain and grey days. Man, this winter has been up there as, conditions-wise, one of the worst for good photography conditions. I'm sure you'll agree with me if you're a photographer in the UK that we've had really hardly anything worth photographing this winter. We've had a couple of days of snow. We had a nice hoarfrost in December. But other than that, it's been mostly like this, wet, grey days. I was looking at some photos that I took this time last year, almost exactly to the day. And the conditions we were getting were unbelievable. We had cloud inversions, glorious sunny days, windless days, and oh man, it feels like it's a real challenge to get some good photography in at the moment. And the pressure is on, especially when you're trying to produce content for YouTube. So you will have to forgive me if it feels like it's been a while since I've produced a really, really good photo. I'd like to say it's not my fault. I'm not making excuses, but I'm sure you can sympathise. There we are, rant over. Let's get back to the 50mm lens. So let me talk you through this composition here so that you can copy me if you want to. Have a look at it. So we've got a super simple scene here. We've got, where's my finger here? This tree here. And I want to balance it out with this tree here. And now, as you can see, it curves round at the bottom. It curves round at the bottom, which sort of creates a little frame with these branches at the top. Where are we? Up here. And what that means is that you get a really simple, balanced image. I love the moss that's growing in at the bottom here as well. And you get this lovely side light coming and hitting this tree. Anybody that watches my channel will know that I like my pictures to be really simple, especially woodland photos, which is why I like to get nice and up in its face, not in an aggressive way. Think you're better than me, do you, punk? But in a cut out all the distractions sort of way. So this will be a really good test as well of the image quality of these lenses. Right, I am having to bail because unexpectedly there is a thunderstorm approaching. the one place I do not want to be during a torrential thunderstorm is in the middle of a forest full of very tall trees. So I'm going to continue this elsewhere. I'll see you in a minute. I had to tempt Mother Nature, didn't I? Anyway, over the last few months, I've had the opportunity to use all three of these lenses quite a bit. So I've been able to see the differences, the good and the bad, and to compare them. And I've got quite a few images that we can use to compare them. Now, I did spend a bit of time around that composition. I took a bit of B-roll, got a couple of test shots, but they weren't in focus, so I can't really use them for this. I did manage to get a picture with my iPhone a couple of weeks ago when I was on a family walk there, and it actually helps to demonstrate the point I want to make about these lenses. One of the most important things, obviously, when it comes to having a lens is the image quality that comes out of it. Now, I'll say this straight off the bat, you can get a really good image with any one of these lenses. There isn't a bad choice to make here. There are differences between the three though. For example, shooting wide open, that's something I try and discourage most photographers from doing. Unless you're shooting portrait photos where you want a very strong bokeh in the background, then shooting wide open with any lens isn't really good, especially for landscape photography. Having said that, if you do want one of these to shoot wide open, then these two, the one from 1987 and the one from 1990, they aren't at their sharpest wide open. When you shoot with the aperture wide open, you'll quite quickly find that there's a real strong softness to the image. And particularly with the older one, there is a bit of chromatic aberration once it's wide open. Now, all you need to do to overcome this is just stop down a couple of stops. From there, up all the way up to f11, both of these lenses are really sharp. With the newer one, the one that was manufactured in 2019, and this is something that I want to say about pretty much all modern lenses, this is almost clinically sharp. I mean, like, so sharp it doesn't really look natural. Do you know what I mean by that? Now, I'm going to say something quite controversial here. A lot of people, I find, over-sharpen their images. You can't have that opinion, man. Not on YouTube. What do you mean? It's true. Yeah, I know, but if you say it out loud, you know what will happen. Yeah, I know, but I'm not going to lie to the people at home. Some images are over-sharpened. Fine. I don't want anything to do with it. Nothing. Yeah, okay. I take your point, but I think we'll cover that in a video another time. It is true, though, that often images are very over-sharpened, and I want to use the example of the iPhone image to demonstrate that. Phones have come a long, long way when it comes to photography. I've discussed that at length. Lots of YouTubers have discussed that at length. But one of the main issues is that they are far too sharp, to the point that when I'm editing them in post, I actually mask over the whole thing and de-sharpen the whole image. And that's a point with these lenses. You see, with the Lumix 50mm, it is very, very sharp and it looks good, but you don't always want a very, very sharp image. That's a point I'm going to come on to at the end. Probably the main reason that you want to buy a vintage lens. But before we discuss that, I just want to talk about this week's sponsor, which is VERO. Now, if you don't know what a VERO are, it's a social media platform that concentrates very much on the social aspect of social media. Something that a lot of social medias have completely forgotten, it seems. Now, I've been encouraging photographers to use VERO for quite a while now, without being paid for it. So when they approached me and asked me if I'd like a sponsorship, I was like, yes, please. Because there's so many features about it that are really geared towards photographers like you and I. For example, when you upload a picture, often on a lot of social medias, you have to crop your image to fit whatever the crop is that social media decides they want their pictures to be in. Some will make you crop in 4:5, some will be a square crop. But with VERO, whatever aspect ratio you make your image, that's the aspect ratio that gets shown. That means my followers can see that image exactly how I intended it, without having to compromise my composition for social media or adding a border and making it a lower resolution as a result. But the main thing that VERO is geared towards is the social aspect, as I said before. Now, the community, especially among photographers on VERO, is very, very strong. I've chatted with other photographers on there, and because you don't have to play to an algorithm or worry about adverts being fed across your feed all the time, it means that you can have a strong connection with your viewers and with other photographers if you want that. And networking as photographers is really important. You might think that you just want to communicate with potential customers, but the longer I've been in the photography game, the more I've realized it's good to have good networking with other photographers as well. And the community aspect of VERO is one of the main reasons that I recommend it to people. So if you'd like to follow me on there, there's a link in the description, and I'd love to see you over there. Now, going on to that final point about owning a vintage lens. One of the main reasons to own a vintage lens is character. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, yes, it's true that there are some imperfections in older lenses. These aren't by design, it's just the way they were manufactured. There's a little bit of halation in the highlights sometimes, subtle artifacts, but they're not necessarily a bad thing. Now, the reason I say that is that when you take a picture with any sort of modern lens that is designed to be like critically sharp, you tend to get very unnatural looking photos. And you've probably noticed that there's been a strong shift towards film photography recently. Now, why do you think that is? Film photos tend to be not as good as digital photography, especially more modern cameras. They're less sharp, you get more artifacts, they're more work, you don't get all the technology involved, and yet people absolutely love film photography, and it's having a real resurgence again. That's because those pictures have character that you cannot get with just a standard digital camera and a super sharp lens. Having a vintage lens on a digital camera can give us the same effect. Because you get those sort of small imperfections, they can add a style and character that isn't possible when you're editing your photos. Having a vintage lens, I would describe it as giving your pictures soul. It's the same for video as well. I know a lot of videographers who choose to buy vintage lenses simply for the fact that they'll know they'll get that sort of filmic look with it. And that's something that can be achieved with a vintage lens, and in my opinion, is very effective at helping you produce a piece of art. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a place for very sharp images. I do them all the time, and that's especially true if you're doing something like portrait photography, commercial photography. It's very important to have uber sharp images if you're doing an ad campaign, for example. But when it comes to the sort of photography I love to do, and probably you enjoy doing as well if it's your hobby, then having a vintage lens in your kit will give your pictures some character, some soul. Now, there is a compromise that we can do here. You can buy filters that sort of achieve the same effect. For example, you can buy a black mist filter. What this does is it just screws on the front and sort of gives the same effect as a vintage lens. Gives the highlights a sort of halation effect. And that's really effective. A lot of people do it, especially on YouTube. You see YouTubers using it all the time, especially on their video. And that's a really good compromise if you don't want to buy a vintage lens. It doesn't look the same. There's something a little bit different about it. I can't put my finger on it. If you know the reason why a black mist filter doesn't quite achieve the same results as a vintage lens, I'd love to know, because I don't actually technically know. I just know that the images from this look really filmic and good, but so does this, but for a different reason. I'm not a tech nerd, I'm just a photography nerd. But to be honest, with the price that you can get some vintage lenses for secondhand, you might, like me, want to have both at your disposal anyway, because can you ever really have too many lenses? If you ask my wife, then probably. One thing I don't think you will do is regret having a vintage lens, even if it's just for a little bit. As I said earlier when I was out in the field, they don't tend to reduce in value. So even if you only own one for a few months to try it out, the good thing is that you can probably sell it at least for what you bought it for. Just make sure you do your research, read up a few things. There's a lot of websites that are really good for seeing like older reviews of these sorts of lenses. By the way, I'm absolutely gutted that DP Review's coming to an end. That's been talked about by a lot of photographers, but I just wanted to mention that because they've helped me loads with choosing my camera gear. And I'm glad Chris and Jordan are carrying on another channel, but I'm sure you as photographers agree that that's a big loss to our community. The loss of DP Review, both the YouTube channel and the website. But there are other sites available for finding reviews on these sorts of lenses. One negative that I need to mention is the noisy motors. Now, these have really noisy autofocusing motors. Let me see if I can show you. Can you hear that? That's really loud when it's autofocusing as well. And it's not much better on the Mark II either. Whereas on modern lenses now, almost all of them are completely silent when they're autofocusing. There's absolutely no noise whatsoever. For me, that's personally not a problem, because I'm not doing sort of wedding photography where you might want a quiet lens, or wildlife photography. Not that you would use a 50mm for wildlife photography anyway. Most of the time you want a longer lens for that. But if absolutely silent lenses are something that you would like, then maybe not go for these ones. But if you're looking for something to add to your kit that isn't expensive, that you can have a lot of fun with, then a vintage 50mm f1.8 really is a good choice. You'll probably find it gives your pictures a lot of soul. I'll see you next time.